The living room smelled faintly of stale whiskey and old leather. I had just come home from my evening shift at the diner, still wearing my uniform and holding my backpack in one hand. Before I could even set it down, Robert Hayes, my stepfather, stepped into my path. He was a heavy man with thinning gray hair and a face that carried years of bitterness. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched tight. I had seen him angry before, but that night was different. There was a heaviness in the air, a sense that something irreversible was about to happen. Without warning, Robert's fist came crashing toward me. I felt the impact explode against my cheek, sending me stumbling backward into the coffee table. The edge dug into my back before I collapsed onto the carpet. Pain shot through my jaw and a metallic taste filled my mouth. I could barely catch my breath before he shouted down at me, his voice echoing through the walls of the house I had grown up in. "You are not my blood. You will never get a dime of this house." I froze. The words pierced deeper than the strike. For a moment, the pain in my face was nothing compared to the knife of betrayal in my chest. My mother, Linda Miller, had died less than 2 years earlier. The house we lived in had been hers long before Robert entered our lives. It was filled with her touch, her photographs on the mantel, her favorite quilt folded across the sofa. It was the only piece of her I had left, and now Robert was standing over me, one hand curled into a fist and the other gripping a set of folded papers. My eyes adjusted and I realized what he was holding. It was the last envelope I had carefully placed in the drawer of the hallway cabinet, the envelope that carried my mother's will. I tried to push myself upright, my palms stinging from the carpet burn, but Robert shoved me back down with his foot pressing near my shoulder. His face twisted into a smirk as he waved the document in front of me. "You think you own this place because of a few words on paper. Let me tell you something, Anna. This house is mine. Everything in it is mine. You are nothing. You are just a reminder that your mother made a mistake marrying me." My chest tightened, not just from the weight of his words, but from the fear that he might actually destroy the only protection my mother had left for me. The will was more than legal paperwork. It was my mother's voice speaking beyond the grave. It was her way of making sure I was safe and cared for. Seeing it in Robert's hands, clenched and crumpling, made my stomach churn with dread. He leaned down closer, his breath heavy with alcohol. "You think you are strong enough to fight me? You think the law will protect you? You are just a kid. No one respects you. Without me, you would be out on the street." The sting on my cheek flared as I clenched my fists. For a split second, I thought of my mother's gentle hands brushing my hair, of her whispering late at night that I was her pride, her only daughter, her legacy. The contrast between her love and his cruelty almost broke me. My body trembled not only from fear, but from a rage I could barely contain. That night, my voice trembled in my own mind. I realized I had a choice. I could keep letting him take pieces of me, one bruise, one insult, one humiliation at a time. Or I could fight back, not just for myself, but for my mother, for the promise she made when she left me everything she had. I pushed his foot away and staggered back to my knees. Robert's laughter filled the room, cruel and dismissive, as though he was daring me to resist. In that moment, the pain became clarity. The fear became steel. That was the night I understood. I whispered to myself, even as he towered above me. If I did not fight, I would lose not only my dignity, but also everything my mother entrusted to me. I had to fight or surrender everything. The living room, once a place of family dinners and quiet evenings with my mother, had become a battlefield. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing on me like the bruises already forming beneath my skin. Robert thought I was weak because I was young and because I was not his blood. What he did not know was that blood was not the only thing that gave someone strength. Love did. Memory did. The unbreakable bond between a daughter and her mother did. As he stood there, crushing the envelope in his hand, I locked eyes with him. The hatred in his stare was sharp, but something new had awakened in me. A resolve he could not shake with fists or threats. That night, my inner voice declared, was the beginning. The night I realized I would fight back. Anna Miller was 20 years old when she found herself trapped in the kind of home that no longer felt like home. To explain how it all came to this, I need to go back 5 years earlier to the time when her mother, Linda Miller, decided to remarry. Linda had been a widow for nearly a decade, raising Anna on her own while working double shifts at a local hospital. She was a kind, steady woman with a soft laugh and a heart that often gave people the benefit of the doubt. When Linda met Robert Hayes, Anna was just 15. Robert presented himself as a man who had been unlucky in life, but was ready to turn over a new leaf. He wore pressed shirts to their early dates, opened doors for Linda, and even brought small gifts for Anna, like a bracelet from a thrift shop, or a book he said reminded him of her. At first, Anna thought he was trying too hard, but she kept her mouth shut because she wanted to see her mother smile. Linda deserved happiness after so many years of loneliness. The wedding was small, held in the backyard of the Miller home. Friends and neighbors came clinking glasses under string lights. Anna stood beside her mother, smiling for the pictures, even though a quiet unease tugged at her heart. Something about Robert's eyes when he thought no one was watching made her stomach twist, but she swallowed her doubt. If her mother was happy, she told herself that was enough. The first year seemed almost normal. Robert worked odd jobs, nothing steady but enough to cover his share of bills, or so he said. He called Anna Kiddo and pretended to show interest in her school projects. Linda beamed with gratitude, telling her daughter that maybe they had finally found the family they both longed for. But cracks appeared quickly. Robert started spending more time at bars, coming home late with the smell of alcohol thick on his clothes. His jobs never lasted more than a few months, and somehow the bills always ended up on Linda's shoulders. Anna began to notice that whenever her mother brought up money, Robert would snap, claiming he was doing his best, that no one respected him, that the world had been unfair. Anna kept her head down, busying herself with high school and part-time work at the grocery store, but the unease never left. Then came the darkest chapter of all Linda's diagnosis. Stage 4, cancer. It was sudden, brutal, and left little time for hope. Anna spent nights at the hospital holding her mother's frail hand while Robert showed up occasionally, usually looking inconvenienced. He would mutter about medical bills, about how the house might need to be sold, and sometimes he would vanish for days. Anna grew furious but bit her tongue. She did not want her mother's last months clouded by arguments. When Linda passed, the funeral was small and quiet, a reflection of her life of simple dignity. Anna felt like a part of her soul had been ripped away. She stood by the casket with tears streaming down her face, promising silently that she would protect the home and the memories her mother left behind. Robert, dressed in a wrinkled suit, stood off to the side, looking more bored than broken. It was only after the funeral that Anna discovered the envelope in the hallway cabinet. It was addressed in her mother's handwriting and sealed carefully. Inside was the will notarized and clear. The house, the savings account, and all personal belongings were left to Anna, her only child. Linda had thought ahead. She had wanted her daughter safe. For a while, Anna clung to that will as her lifeline. She worked part-time at the diner while enrolling in community college. She balanced her studies with her shifts, and every paycheck went toward keeping the lights on, paying property taxes, and preserving the home exactly as her mother had left it. She hung on because that house was more than bricks and walls. It was the smell of Linda's perfume still lingering in the curtains, the sound of her laughter echoing in the hallway, the garden she had tended every spring. But Robert was still there. He insisted he had nowhere else to go, and that as Linda's husband he had a right to live in the house. Anna was young and grieving, unsure of how much power she had, so she allowed him to stay. She told herself it was temporary, that maybe compassion would keep things from getting worse. For a short time he acted subdued, almost respectful, as if he understood her loss. But gradually, the truth revealed itself. He contributed nothing. He sat on the couch most days, watching television, drinking beer, and criticizing Anna's choices. Whenever she left for work or school, he would scoff and call her ungrateful for not appreciating him. The man who once tried to charm her mother with flowers now survived entirely off the efforts of a 20-year-old girl. Friends of Anna encouraged her to kick him out, but she was still clinging to the memory of her mother's marriage. She wanted to believe her mother had not made a terrible mistake in trusting Robert. Perhaps out of loyalty to Linda's choice, perhaps out of fear, Anna let him linger. But with each passing month, the weight of his presence grew heavier. bills piled up that Anna alone was paying. Groceries vanished faster than she could afford to replace them, and Robert began to complain that he was not being treated like the head of the household. The very house he contributed nothing to was the place he demanded authority over. Anna kept her pain quiet, but at night she would lie awake in her childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling, wondering what her mother would want her to do. She whispered to the walls, telling Linda that she was trying, that she was holding everything together, that she had not forgotten her promise. What she did not know then was that Robert had already begun plotting. He had seen the envelope. He knew about the will. And though he said nothing for the first year, his resentment was growing, bubbling beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when it would erupt into something Anna could no longer ignore. Robert's presence in the house shifted from inconvenient to unbearable in small but steady ways, like drops of water wearing away stone. At first, Anna Miller thought she could handle it, that her mother's choice of husband deserved at least a sliver of respect. But as the months passed, his true nature revealed itself in full. He rarely looked for work anymore, preferring to lounge in the recliner with a beer can balanced on his stomach while the television blared late into the night. Anna, juggling her college classes and long shifts at the diner, would come home exhausted, only to find dirty dishes piled high, empty bottles on the counter, and Robert demanding she use her paycheck for groceries. She noticed the pattern quickly. Whenever she bought food, Robert ate the most expensive items first, leaving her with scraps. When she set aside money for utilities, he conveniently forgot his promises to contribute. Every bill that arrived in the mailbox became hers to manage. Robert's words grew sharper, his tone more entitled. Without me, he would sneer as she stood at the sink washing his plates. You'd be homeless. Who else would keep you safe in this neighborhood? Anna bit back the urge to laugh at the absurdity. He was not protecting her. He was draining her, but she swallowed her anger because she still remembered her mother's smile on the wedding day, remembered Linda's soft words telling her that Robert might be lonely, that he deserved a chance. Out of loyalty to her mother's memory, Anna tolerated his arrogance longer than she should have. The cracks widened when he began interfering with her small attempts at independence. Anna had saved up for a used laptop to help with her coursework, a modest machine she guarded carefully. One afternoon, she returned from the diner to find Robert scrolling through gambling sites on it, his greasy fingers leaving smudges across the keys. When she protested, he barked that anything in the house was his by right. Another week, she discovered that $50 she had tucked in a drawer was gone. Robert shrugged when confronted, telling her she must have misplaced it. The theft stung, but what hurt more was his utter lack of shame. His behavior poisoned the atmosphere for Anna's friends, too. Rachel, her closest confidant, stopped visiting as often after Robert made lewd jokes during one of their study sessions. Anna felt isolated, trapped with a man who disrespected her in every possible way. At night, she lay awake listening to him snore in the next room, wondering how long she could endure this imbalance. The turning point in this slow-burning conflict came on a rainy Friday when Anna asked Robert if he could at least handle the lawn care since she was drowning in work and school. He looked at her with disdain, took another swig from his beer, and muttered, "You should be grateful I even let you stay here. Remember, kid, this place stands because of me." The hypocrisy of his words nearly made her choke. This was the house her mother had bought years before Robert arrived, the house Linda had maintained through her illness. The house legally promised to Anna through the will Robert pretended not to know existed. But in that moment, Anna realized something chilling. Robert truly believed his own lies. He believed he was owed control, respect, and resources simply for existing in her life. Seeds of conflict became roots of resentment. Each insult carved a deeper wound, each theft added another layer of mistrust, each false claim of authority stripped away the fragile patience Anna still carried. She began to document things quietly, keeping notes of what bills she had paid, what groceries she had bought, and what Robert had consumed or destroyed. Part of her hoped it would never come to a confrontation, but deep down she sensed the storm was building. She sensed that one day soon he would push harder, demand more, cross a line. Even her loyalty to her mother's memory could not excuse. And when that day arrived, Anna promised herself she would be ready. Anna Miller's tolerance for Robert Hayes began to erode completely when his words turned sharper, more calculated, and deliberately cruel. At first it had been laziness, arrogance, and theft, but now it was his voice, that rasping sneer digging into her spirit every single day. Robert had a way of timing his remarks to wound her when she was most vulnerable. If she came home tired from a double shift, he would smirk and say she looked pathetic, that no one would ever take her seriously because she was just a kid. When she studied late at the kitchen table, textbooks spread out and laptop humming, he would shuffle in with a beer laugh and mutter, "Why waste your time? Nobody respects you. You will never amount to anything." Anna tried to ignore it, bury herself in schoolwork, but the constant drip of contempt started to wear down her confidence. She noticed herself hesitating before answering questions in class, doubting her own words even when she knew the answer. His abuse was not only about insults, it was about stripping away her sense of self. On one particularly hard evening, Anna had received her property tax bill in the mail. She sat at the table, tears stinging her eyes as she calculated how to stretch her diner wages to cover it. Robert wandered in, glanced at the envelope, and barked out a laugh. "You really think you can handle this place on your own? You are nothing without me. You should be thanking me every day for keeping this roof over your head." The hypocrisy twisted in her stomach. He had never paid a single cent toward the taxes or maintenance, but he claimed the credit for her sacrifices. When she dared to point this out, his eyes narrowed and his voice turned low and venomous. "Careful, kid. No one cares about your whining. You are just a burden, a leftover from your mother's mistake." His words sliced deep, and for a moment, Anna felt like she was 14 again, standing awkwardly at her mother's wedding to this man telling herself that maybe he was not so bad. But now, the truth was unavoidable. He despised her, and he wanted her to believe she was worthless. Emotional abuse became Robert's daily weapon. He controlled the atmosphere of the house with constant criticism, unpredictable moods, and belittling commentary. If Anna cooked dinner, he would sneer at the portions, accusing her of being selfish. If she cleaned the living room, he would point out a missed corner and say she was useless. Even her appearance became a target. "No wonder you are alone," he muttered one evening as she passed him in the hallway. "Look at you. Nobody wants someone like you." Anna felt the words settle like a heavy stone in her chest, but deep inside, a spark of defiance flickered. She remembered her mother's voice, the soft reassurance that she was smart, capable, and loved. Robert's insults were meant to erase that memory, but Anna clung to it as a lifeline. She began to record his words in a small notebook she kept hidden beneath her mattress. Every insult, every manipulation, every moment he twisted reality to make her feel powerless went into those pages. Writing it down gave her a sense of control, a reminder that she was not imagining his cruelty. The pages filled quickly. What made the situation unbearable was that Robert's abuse did not stop at words alone. He began to demand more money, cornering her in the kitchen and insisting she hand over her tips before she could even deposit them. When she refused, his voice would boom through the house, dripping with menace. "Do not forget you live here because of me. Without me, you would be on the street. You are nothing." The repetition of those words dug trenches in her mind, but instead of breaking her, they planted something else: anger. For months, she had been bending under the weight of his presence, but now she was beginning to stand taller, at least inside. Each cruel remark, each demand, each insult added fuel to a fire that had started in the moment he struck her and declared she was not his blood. She did not lash out yet, but she started preparing quietly, emotionally, arming herself for the day when his emotional abuse would no longer be endured in silence. And in the silence of her room, with her notebook full of venomous quotes and her mother's picture resting on the nightstand, Anna whispered into the dark, promising Linda that she would not allow Robert to destroy everything that mattered. She would endure for now, but she would also be ready. It happened on a Sunday evening, one of those nights when Anna Miller thought she might finally catch her breath. She had spent the weekend working back-to-back shifts at the diner and had managed to set aside just enough tip money to cover her next round of tuition payments. She tucked the cash into an envelope and slid it carefully into her desk drawer, feeling a momentary wave of relief. For once, she was ahead of the bills. She allowed herself to believe she could keep her promise to her mother that she could hold on to both her education and the house that had been entrusted to her. But Robert Hayes had been watching. He always seemed to sense when Anna had a little more than usual, and that evening he cornered her in the kitchen. His voice slurred from the beer he had been drinking since noon. "Hand it over!" "Anna," he growled, holding out his palm. She clutched her backpack tighter and shook her head. "This is for school. You know that." His eyes narrowed and a mocking smile spread across his face. "School. You think you are better than me because you are sitting in some classroom. You are just a kid who owes me everything. I kept you under this roof and now you pay me back." Anna's heart pounded, but she steadied her voice. "You did not keep me under this roof. My mother did. I have worked for every bill that is paid here. You are not getting my tuition money." For a moment, the kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Robert's smile twisted into rage. He stepped closer, his breath heavy with alcohol, his face inches from hers. "You ungrateful brat!" he spat. "You think you can talk to me like that?" When she tried to step past him, he shoved her hard against the counter. The edge dug into her hip and she gasped from the shock of it. Pain rippled up her side, but before she could react, his hands were on her shoulders, forcing her back again. This time, her head knocked against the cabinet door. The thud echoed in her skull and her vision blurred for a second. She froze, trembling, realizing this was no longer just words. Robert's anger had turned physical. He loomed over her, red-faced and snarling. "You are nothing without me," he hissed. "Do you hear me? Nothing." Tears stung Anna's eyes, but she clenched her jaw, refusing to let him see her break. She pushed his arm away and darted down the hallway to her room, slamming the door and sliding the lock into place. Her whole body shook as she pressed her back against the wood, trying to calm her ragged breathing. She stared at her reflection in the mirror across the room, her hair tangled, her cheek flushed from where his hand had grazed it. Fear and humiliation wrapped around her chest like a vice. For hours, she sat on the edge of her bed, listening for his footsteps, waiting to see if he would come after her. He did not that night. Instead, she heard the television turn on the volume, blasting louder than usual, as if he wanted her to know he had won. But something had shifted inside Anna. The fear was real, but beneath it was a cold clarity. She realized that Robert had crossed a line that could never be undone. Words could be ignored, insults could be written down, but the bruise forming on her hip and the ache at the back of her head were proof that he was capable of more than cruelty. He was capable of destroying her. The next morning, she examined herself in the mirror, tracing the faint mark where she had hit the cabinet. She touched her side, wincing, and then she made a decision. She pulled out a spiral notebook and began writing not just his words, but every detail of what had happened the night before, the time, the place, the exact phrases he had shouted, the way he shoved her, the way her head struck the wood. She noted the bruise and sketched its outline on the page. She slipped the notebook back under her mattress, but now it carried more than insults. It carried evidence. She knew she was not yet strong enough to throw him out, but she also knew she needed to be prepared. This was no longer just a battle of wills. It was survival. That evening, when Robert passed her in the hallway, he smirked like nothing had happened, like she should accept his violence as just another form of authority. But Anna's eyes met his with a steadiness he had not seen before. She said nothing, but inside she made a vow. If he ever raised his hand again, she would not remain silent. She would not let him steal the last pieces of her dignity. She would be ready, and when the moment came, she would fight back. Anna Miller thought she had already endured the worst of Robert Hayes's cruelty, but the night she discovered him with her mother's will proved that everything before had only been the prelude. It was late, the house quiet except for the faint buzz of the refrigerator when she heard the unmistakable sound of drawers being yanked open in the hallway cabinet. At first, she assumed Robert was rummaging for batteries or some misplaced tool, but the sharp rustle of envelopes made her heart lurch. She crept from her bedroom and saw him crouched by the cabinet, his broad back blocking the light, his hands rifling through the papers she had kept carefully organized. In his grip was the envelope she had guarded since the funeral, the envelope marked in her mother's neat handwriting. Panic seized her chest. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice breaking. Robert turned slowly, his face illuminated by the hallway lamp, and in his hand was the folded will of Linda Miller. He waved it like a trophy, his smirk dripping with venom. "So this is what you have been hiding. Your golden ticket. Your mother's little letter to the world." Anna's stomach twisted. "Put that back. It is mine." Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. Robert's eyes narrowed. "Not anymore." He tore the flap open and scanned the pages, his lips curling as he read the words that confirmed what he must have suspected all along. The house, the savings, the belongings all left to Anna. He let out a bitter laugh that reverberated through the hallway. "Not his blood, not his money," he spat. "Do you actually think a piece of paper makes you stronger than me?" Anna stepped forward, her fists clenched at her sides. "It is not just paper. It is my mother's word, her choice. She wanted me safe. She wanted me to have this house." Robert's expression shifted, the smirk hardening into rage. He crumpled one of the extra documents from the drawer in his fist and threw it to the floor. "Safe. You are a fool if you think anything can keep you safe from me. I have lived here. I have put up with you. I am the husband she chose, and that makes this mine. All of it. The law will see it my way." His tone carried the drunken confidence of someone who had spent years bending truth to his will. Anna's breath caught as he lifted the will above his head as though threatening to tear it. Her voice cracked but did not falter. "If you destroy that, it changes nothing. There are copies. It was notarized. The law will not let you take what does not belong to you." His eyes flared with fury at her defiance. "Do not lecture me on the law. You think some lawyer cares about a spoiled little girl? I can forge signatures. I can make this disappear. You will be left with nothing." The threat hit harder than his fists had days before. Her pulse pounded in her ears as the weight of his intent became clear. He was not just cruel, he was dangerous. He was planning to erase her mother's wishes entirely to rewrite the truth until it suited him. For the first time, Anna saw not just a drunk, lazy man, but a predator circling what he believed was his prey. She forced herself to meet his gaze, her own voice trembling with both fear and fury. "You will not win. My mother trusted me for a reason. You cannot take that away." Robert laughed bitterly, the sound echoing down the empty hall. He leaned in close, the stench of beer on his breath, and whispered, "Watch me." In that moment, Anna realized her situation was more perilous than she had allowed herself to admit. The bruises on her body had been warnings, but this was war over her very survival and the last gift her mother had left her. She backed away, her mind racing. She would have to protect the will, hide it where he could not reach, and gather proof of his threats before he carried them out. She knew the law was on her side, but without evidence, Robert could twist the narrative as he always had. As she retreated to her room, clutching the thought of her mother's voice in her heart, Robert's mocking laughter followed her. He believed he had all the power. He believed fear would silence her. But in that moment beneath the dread, something fierce ignited in Anna. She would not let him destroy her mother's legacy. She would not let him erase her future. The discovery of the will was no longer just about paper and ink. It was the dividing line between the life Robert wanted to steal from her and the life she was determined to fight for no matter the cost. Anna Miller woke the next morning with her heart still pounding from the confrontation in the hallway. The image of Robert Hayes clutching her mother's will burned into her mind like a scar. She had hidden the document under a loose floorboard in her bedroom during the early hours of the morning, but the memory of his threat lingered. For days afterward, the house felt like a cage where each corner echoed with his voice. He prowled from room to room, muttering under his breath, sometimes loud enough for her to hear about how he would soon have everything, how a girl like her could not possibly stand against him. At first, she tried to ignore him, bury herself in schoolwork and double shifts at the diner, but the tension grew unbearable. The breaking point came one cold night in February. Snow drifted against the windows, and Anna sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, reviewing her notes for an upcoming exam. She wore a sweater her mother had knitted, one of the last pieces of warmth she still owned. Robert staggered in from the living room, his face flushed from drink, his eyes bloodshot with rage that seemed to have no source other than his own bitterness. He saw her at the table and sneered, "Still pretending you are smarter than everyone else. Sitting here with your little books while I run this house." Anna closed her notebook and tried to stay calm. "You do not run this house, Robert. This is my mother's home. She left it to me." The words snapped something inside him. He crossed the kitchen in 2 strides and slammed his hand on the table, sending her cup clattering to the floor. "Do not say that again," he roared. "I am the man here. I make the rules. You are nothing but an ungrateful brat who should be on her knees thanking me for letting her stay." His spittle landed on her cheek and she flinched. She could smell the sour alcohol in his breath. When she stood and tried to step away, his hand lashed out and struck her across the face. The blow sent her stumbling against the refrigerator pane, exploding along her jaw. She cried out, but he was not finished. He grabbed her by the arm, yanking her back toward the table, his grip iron and merciless. "You think you can defy me," he bellowed. "You are not my blood. You do not matter. Everything you think is yours belongs to me now." Anna's eyes filled with tears, but beneath the fear a new steel formed. She remembered her mother's final days, the way Linda had clutched her hand and whispered that she believed in her. That belief became Anna's shield. She twisted her arm, breaking free of his grip, and shouted, "You will never own me. You will never own this house." Robert's face darkened, and he swung again, his fist connecting with her shoulder this time. She fell to the ground, her breath knocked out of her, but instead of cowering, she forced herself to look up at him with defiance. "If you destroy me, you destroy yourself," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "And I will never stop fighting." The words seemed to rattle him for a split second, but then his fury returned. He stormed out of the kitchen, cursing under his breath, leaving Anna crumpled on the floor, shaking but not broken. She pulled herself up slowly, her body aching from the blows, and stared at her reflection in the darkened kitchen window. A bruise was already forming on her cheek, but in her eyes burned a fire that had never been there before. That night, she sat in her room pressing an ice pack against her face and whispered to herself, "This ends now." She opened her notebook and wrote down every detail, every insult, every strike, every threat. She dated the page carefully, making sure the record would be undeniable. She even sketched the marks on her skin, evidence she could no longer ignore. It was no longer enough to hope Robert would change or to endure his cruelty out of loyalty to her mother's memory. He had crossed the line from emotional torment to physical assault, and she knew he would not stop. The breaking point was not just his violence. It was the moment Anna realized that survival meant action. She could not protect her mother's legacy by hiding. She had to fight back. She had to be smarter than him, braver than her fear, and stronger than the man who thought fists could erase bloodlines. She whispered her vow into the night, gripping the photograph of her mother she kept on the nightstand. "I will not let him win. I will not let him take what is ours." The tears that fell were not only from pain, but from determination. Anna knew she had reached the edge, and beyond it lay a battle she could no longer avoid. Anna Miller woke the morning after the worst beating with her body aching and her spirit teetering between despair and resolve. The bruises on her cheek and shoulder throbbed with every movement, a constant reminder of Robert Hayes's violence. She sat on the edge of her bed, clutching her mother's photograph, whispering the promise she had made the night before. If she wanted to survive, if she wanted to honor her mother's legacy, she could not wait for someone else to rescue her. She had to fight back. The first step was securing the will. The copy she had hidden under the floorboard gave her some peace, but she worried Robert might tear apart her room if he grew suspicious. She decided to create layers of protection. On her lunch break at the diner, she slipped into the public library, scanned the document onto a flash drive, and emailed it to herself with the subject line, "School Project." She even printed another copy and tucked it into a folder at Rachel's apartment. Rachel was her closest friend, someone who had always sensed Robert's malice and had begged Anna to move out. When Rachel saw the bruises on Anna's arm as she handed her the envelope, her eyes filled with fury. "This is it, Anna. You cannot keep living with him. You need to go to the police." Anna shook her head. Not yet. I need proof. If I walk in there with just bruises, he will spin it. He always spins it. But if I can catch him admitting what he has done, if I can show he plans to forge documents, then they will believe me. Rachel reluctantly agreed, promising to keep the backup copy safe. That night, Anna returned home to find Robert sprawled on the couch, half asleep, with a beer bottle dangling from his hand. His presence no longer made her shrink. Instead, she looked at him with calculation. She slipped her phone into her pocket set to record, ready for the next explosion. Days passed and Anna played her role carefully. She pretended to submit cooking meals, keeping quiet, making sure Robert never suspected she was gathering a case against him. Meanwhile, she recorded everything: his drunken rants about how the house is mine, his threats to forge signatures, his muttered curses about her being useless and ungrateful. Each recording became another brick in the wall of evidence she was building. The most damning moment came one Saturday when Robert staggered into the kitchen waving a blank sheet of paper. "You know what, kid," he slurred. "All it takes is one signature. I can make your mother's will disappear just like that. The house will be mine. You will be out on the street where you belong." Anna's hand shook as she stirred the pot on the stove, but her phone captured every word from her pocket. When he stormed out to the porch to smoke, she locked herself in her room and listened back to the recording, tears of relief and fear mingling as she realized she had what she needed. The emotional undulation inside her was fierce moments of triumph that she had proof moments of terror, imagining what he might do if he discovered her plan. At night, she lay awake listening for his footsteps, every creak of the floorboards raising her pulse. But with each recording, each written note, her resolve hardened. She was no longer just enduring. She was preparing. The turning point in her counterattack came when Robert confronted her late one evening after rifling through her backpack. He had found nothing but suspicion gleamed in his eyes. "What are you hiding, Anna?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. She forced herself to remain calm, lifting her chin. "I am hiding nothing. But maybe you should be careful what you admit to. People might be listening." His eyes narrowed, but before he could press further, she walked away. Inside, she was trembling, but she knew she had planted a seed of fear in him, a reminder that she was not as powerless as he believed. The next day, she visited a legal aid office near campus, sliding the recordings across the table to a young attorney who listened with a grave expression. "Anna, this is serious," the lawyer said. "What he is doing is abuse, and what he is planning is fraud. You need to report this." Anna nodded, her voice soft but firm. "I will, but I need to be ready. I need to make sure he cannot twist it." Over the following week, Anna orchestrated her daily life like a careful strategist. She hid money in small increments at Rachel's place, making sure Robert could not seize her tuition funds. She double-checked the locks on her room, kept her phone charged, and carried the flash drive with a copy of the will in her wallet. Every insult he hurled at her, every threat he made, she answered not with silence, but with the quiet click of her phone recording. The emotional rhythm swung like a pendulum. The fear of his fists still haunted her, but the satisfaction of knowing she was building her case gave her strength. She found herself speaking back to him not with defiance that would provoke another strike, but with subtle words that drew out more of his arrogance, more of his admissions. "This house was never yours, Robert," she said one evening when he barked at her to clean up. His eyes blazed. "It is mine because I say it is mine. Blood means nothing if you do not have power." She let him rant, let his own words hang heavy in the air, while her phone quietly captured it all. Each moment he revealed himself, Anna felt her mother's presence guiding her. She remembered Linda's voice, frail but steady in her hospital bed, telling her that strength was not about never being afraid, but about acting in spite of fear. That memory fueled her as she prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Robert believed he still controlled the house, that intimidation and fists could silence her forever. But Anna was no longer the girl who cowered under his insults. She was a young woman armed with truth evidence and the unshakable conviction that she deserved to live free from his cruelty. She was ready to fight back, not with fists, but with proof, not with screams, but with the law. And as she lay in bed that night, the recordings hidden safely in her drawer, she whispered into the darkness, I am ready, Mom. The next time he comes at me, it will be his downfall, not mine. The night of the confrontation arrived with a weight that Anna Miller felt in her bones. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall, each second a drumbeat that pulled her closer to the inevitable collision. Robert Hayes had been restless all day, pacing from room to room, muttering about bills and about how ungrateful she was. By evening, he was drunk enough to let his temper boil over. Anna sat at the kitchen table, her phone hidden in her sweater pocket, already recording. She pretended to read her notes for school, but her entire body was coiled tight, ready for whatever storm was about to break. Robert stumbled in his face, red, his eyes sharp with suspicion. "Where is it, Anna?" he demanded, slamming his fist onto the table hard enough to rattle her cup. She kept her expression calm. "Where is what?" He leaned closer, his breath sour with alcohol. "The will. Do not play games with me. I know you are hiding it. Your mother may have thought she could cut me out, but I am the husband. This house is mine." Anna's hands trembled under the table, but her voice was steady. "My mom trusted me. She left everything to me because she knew you would do exactly this." Robert's face twisted in fury. He grabbed the edge of the table and shouted, "Your mom married me. That makes everything here mine. You are just a guest, a burden. Without me, you would not survive a week." Anna's heart raced, but she forced herself to look him straight in the eye. "She married you, but she trusted me, and you just proved why." The words landed like a slap, and for a moment Robert's mouth fell open. Then his rage returned full force. He lunged across the table, seizing her wrist. "You think you can talk to me like that? You think anyone will believe you? You are not my blood. You are nothing." Anna winced at the pressure on her wrist, but kept her voice strong. "They will believe me, Robert." "Because I have your words." "I have everything you have said." His eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" She pulled her wrist free and stood her phone still recording in her pocket. "I mean that every threat, every insult, every plan you made to forge documents, I have it all. You made sure of that when you could not keep your mouth shut." His face paled for a fraction of a second before darkening again. He lunged toward her, his hand raised, but this time Anna stepped back, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Go ahead. Hit me again. The police will love to hear that too." Robert froze his hand trembling in the air. He looked around the kitchen as if realizing for the first time that he was trapped not by locks or chains but by his own arrogance. Anna pressed on her voice, steady despite the tremor in her knees. "You wanted control. You wanted everything my mother left me. But what you never understood is that power is not about fists. It is about truth. And the truth is you never loved her. You never cared for me, and now you are going to lose everything." He snarled, but the fight in his eyes flickered with doubt. "You wouldn't dare," he muttered. Anna pulled her phone from her pocket, the red recording light glowing faintly in the dim kitchen. "I already have." For a long moment they stood frozen, the air charged with tension, his face twisted between rage and fear. Then he turned away, slamming his fist into the wall, leaving a dent in the plaster. "You think you have won," he spat, "but you are still weak. You will always be weak." Anna's voice softened, but it carried the weight of finality. "No, Robert, I am stronger than you will ever be, because I am not afraid of you anymore." She held the phone tightly, her heart still racing, knowing that this was the moment everything shifted. The confrontation had exposed him, completely stripped away any illusion of control he thought he had. She could see it in his eyes, the realization that his threats no longer held her captive. He stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled, but Anna did not flinch. She stood in the silence that followed, breathing hard, her body trembling with adrenaline. She replayed the recording, listening to his words echo back through the tiny speaker, proof that she was not alone, proof that the law would stand with her. For the first time in years, she felt the chains of fear loosen. The confrontation had not been easy. It had left her shaken, her wrist sore, her heart pounding. But it had also lit a fire in her that could not be extinguished. She had faced the man who had tried to break her, and she had shown him that his power was gone. She whispered into the empty room to her mother, to herself. I am ready. Whatever comes next, I will not back down. The morning after the confrontation, Anna Miller woke with swollen eyes and aching muscles, but for the first time in years, she felt a strange kind of strength in her chest. The phone in her hand still held the recording, his words sharp and undeniable, and she knew it was time to move. She called Rachel, her voice steady, though her body shook. I have it, she whispered. He admitted everything. I need help. Rachel arrived an hour later, her jaw tight with anger as she saw the fresh bruise on Anna's wrist. Together, they walked to the legal aid office where Anna had gone before, and this time she did not hold back. She laid her notebook on the desk, page after page of detailed notes about the insults, the theft, the threats. Then she placed her phone beside it, scrolling to the recordings where Robert Hayes's voice filled the room. The house is mine. I will forge the papers. She is nothing. The attorney listened in silence, his brow furrowed, then finally nodded. Anna, this is more than enough. You need to file a police report immediately. With these recordings and the will, we can secure a restraining order and protect your rights. The words sent a tremor of relief through her, but fear lingered. She knew Robert would explode once he realized the law was involved. Still, she signed the forms, her pen scratching across the paper with finality. That evening, 2 officers knocked on the door of the house. Robert opened it, beer in hand, his face twisting when he saw the uniforms. What is this? He barked. Anna stood behind them, her voice trembling but audible. I filed a report. I gave them proof. The officer's tone was calm but firm. Mr. Hayes, we need you to come with us. You are being detained on suspicion of domestic assault and attempted fraud. Robert laughed a harsh, ugly sound. Fraud assault. This is my house. She is just a girl throwing a tantrum. The second officer stepped forward. We have recordings of your statements, sir. We also have documentation of physical harm. You need to come peacefully. Robert's face turned red, his chest heaving, but when the officer reached for his arm, he jerked back and roared, This is a joke. You cannot take me out of my own home. Anna's voice cut through the chaos, clear and steady. It was never your home, Robert. It was my mother's. It is mine now. The words seemed to stun him more than the officer's grip. He struggled briefly, but they cuffed him and guided him out to the squad car, his curses echoing down the street. Neighbors peeked through curtains, whispers spreading as flashing lights illuminated the house. Anna stood in the doorway, her body trembling but her chin lifted. When the car pulled away, she exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. At the station, she gave her full statement. She described the night he struck her, the threats he made, the exact words he used when he discovered the will. She handed over her notebook, her recordings, the photographs of her bruises. The officers treated her with a respect she had not expected, their calm questions allowing her to finally pour out the story she had carried alone for so long. When she returned home that night, the silence was heavy, but it was no longer suffocating. Robert's presence had been torn from the walls, leaving only space for her own breath. The legal process unfolded quickly in the following days. The restraining order was granted, barring him from coming within 100 yards of the property. The attorney assured her that the notarized will, combined with the recordings, left no room for Robert to claim ownership. You have the law on your side now, he told her. He cannot touch you. Still, Anna moved cautiously, double-checking the locks each evening, jumping at every unfamiliar sound. But alongside the fear was relief, a rising tide of hope that perhaps her life could truly begin again. Rachel stayed with her the first week, keeping her company as she sorted through the damage left behind. Beer bottles littered the living room, dents scarred the walls where his fists had struck, and the stench of smoke lingered in the curtains. Together they cleaned, scrubbed, and opened every window until the air felt lighter. Each sweep of the mop, each bag of trash hauled to the curb felt like a small act of reclaiming. The law had stepped in, but Anna knew the battle was not over. Court dates were coming. Testimonies would have to be given. Robert would not go quietly. Yet as she lay in her bed one night, the restraining order pinned to the wall beside her like a shield, she whispered to her mother again. I did it, Mom. I told the truth. They believe me. He cannot hurt us anymore. The silence of the house seemed to answer back with a sense of peace she had not felt since Linda's passing. For the first time, Anna allowed herself to imagine a future without Robert's shadow, a life where her mother's legacy was safe, where her own strength had carried her through. She had involved the police, and the law had listened. It was the first real step toward freedom, and she was ready for whatever came next. The courthouse loomed large and intimidating as Anna Miller walked up its stone steps, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. She clutched her folder tightly inside of it, the will copies of her recordings and photographs of her bruises. Rachel walked beside her, offering silent support, while the attorney carried a neat stack of documents that represented months of pain and preparation. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with the smell of old wood and paper, the murmur of voices bouncing off the high ceilings. Robert Hayes sat at the defendant's table, his hair combed back, his suit wrinkled but presentable, a sneer tugging at the corners of his mouth. When his eyes met Anna's, they were filled with the same contempt she had known for years, but she no longer looked away. She took her seat at the witness stand when called, her palms sweaty but her voice determined. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and sharp glasses, opened the session, reminding both parties that this was a court of law where facts mattered more than bluster. Robert's lawyer began with bluster anyway. He painted Robert as a grieving widower unfairly maligned by a bitter stepdaughter who wanted to cut him out. He claimed Robert had supported the household, that he had every right to the property as Linda's husband. Anna clenched her fists beneath the table, anger rising, but when her attorney rose to speak, the tide shifted. He presented the notarized will, first its language clear and binding all assets, including the house, were left to Anna Miller, sole heir and daughter of Linda Miller. The courtroom grew still as the words were read aloud. Robert shifted uncomfortably, his lawyer's arguments suddenly less confident. Then came the recordings. The attorney pressed play on the first file, and Robert's voice filled the room, harsh and unmistakable. "The house is mine. I will forge the papers." "She is nothing." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Anna watched Robert's face redden, his jaw tightening as the judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Another recording played, this one of Robert threatening Anna directly. "You are not my blood. You are nothing. I can make the will disappear." The venom in his tone was undeniable. The judge looked over her glasses at Robert, unimpressed with his lawyer's attempts to object. Then Anna was called to testify. She took the oath, her hand trembling slightly, then began to recount everything. She spoke about the insults, the manipulation, the night he shoved her against the counter, the bruise on her cheek, the way he ripped through drawers until he found the will. Her voice shook at first, but then steadied as she remembered why she was there. She described her mother's last words, the promise she had made to protect the house, and how Robert's cruelty had nearly broken her. By the time she finished, the courtroom was silent. Even the clerk looked shaken. Robert's lawyer tried to cross-examine her, sneering that she had exaggerated, that she wanted to paint her stepfather as a monster. But when he asked whether she had any proof beyond her word, Anna's attorney calmly pointed to the notebook she had kept, each entry dated and written in detail. The judge asked to see it. Page after page revealed the careful documentation of abuse, the pattern of control, the steady escalation from words to violence. It was the kind of evidence that spoke louder than any accusation. Robert grew agitated, slamming his hand on the table and muttering under his breath that this was all a setup. His outburst only made things worse. The judge's gavel struck the bench sharply. "Mr. Hayes, control yourself. This is not your living room. This is my courtroom." The proceedings continued, but the outcome was becoming clear. When closing arguments were made, Anna's attorney stood tall. "This is not just a case about property," he said. "This is a case about respect for the dead, protection for the living, and the truth that no one, no matter how entitled they feel, can erase the will of a woman who knew exactly who she trusted. Linda Miller trusted her daughter. That trust is written in ink and notarized by law. And Robert Hayes himself has provided the evidence that he intended to violate that trust through intimidation and fraud." The judge recessed for deliberation, and Anna sat with Rachel, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes closed as she whispered a prayer to her mother. Minutes felt like hours before the judge returned her expression firm and resolute. "The court recognizes the validity of the will in question." All property and assets are legally transferred to Anna Miller as designated by her mother, Linda Miller. Furthermore, given the compelling evidence of abuse and threats, the restraining order will remain in full effect. Mr. Hayes, your claims are denied, and you will face separate criminal proceedings for your actions. The gavel struck, and it was over. Relief washed through Anna's body like a flood. She glanced at Robert one last time. His face was twisted with fury and defeat, his lawyer packing up documents in silence. For once, his words held no power. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp, and Anna felt the weight of years lift from her shoulders. Rachel hugged her tightly, whispering, "You did it. She would be so proud of you." Anna smiled through tears, clutching the folder to her chest. "I did it for her, and for me." The courthouse doors closed behind them, and for the first time in a long time, Anna believed in a future free from Robert's shadow, a future built on strength, truth, and the memory of a mother who had given her the courage to fight. Anna Miller returned home from the courthouse with a strange silence ringing in her ears. Not the silence of fear she had known for so long, but a silence that felt like the closing of one chapter and the hesitant beginning of another. The house, once a battlefield, now stood still, bathed in afternoon light, spilling through the windows. For years, the air inside had been heavy with Robert Hayes's presence, with the stench of beer smoke and anger, but now it was only hers. She stood in the doorway, clutching her mother's will and the court order that had finally validated her truth, and breathed deeply for what felt like the first time since Linda Miller had passed away. The days that followed were filled with both relief and the slow work of rebuilding. Rachel stayed close by, helping her clean repaint and restore the rooms Robert had damaged. They scrubbed away stains, patched holes in the walls, and opened every window until the air felt light and clean. Each act of repair became symbolic, a way of taking back what had been stolen. At night, when the work was done, Anna would sit in the living room with a cup of tea, staring at her mother's photograph on the mantel. She spoke softly to it, telling Linda about the courtroom, about the recordings, about the way Robert had been dragged away in cuffs. She imagined her mother's proud smile, imagined her voice saying, "You did exactly what I hoped you would, Anna. You stood strong." The emotional waves came often. Some mornings she woke with tears streaming down her face, haunted by the echo of his insults. At other times, she laughed unexpectedly, overwhelmed by the relief of knowing she could walk through her own hallway without bracing for his voice. The undulation of grief, anger, relief, and gratitude became her rhythm. Friends who had drifted away because of Robert's hostility began to return. Rachel organized a small gathering one weekend, and for the first time in years, Anna filled the house with laughter. Neighbors who had whispered behind curtains during the night of Robert's arrest now came by with pies and warm words, telling her they had suspected something was wrong, but had not known how to help. Their support reminded her that she had not been as alone as she once believed. The legal victory gave her confidence, but it also left her with scars she could not easily erase. She began therapy, encouraged by her attorney, and found herself slowly unpacking the years of emotional abuse. Her therapist reminded her that surviving was not the same as healing, and Anna embraced the long process ahead. She kept writing in her notebook, but now the entries were different. Instead of recording threats, she wrote affirmations, goals, and small moments of peace. She marked the first night she slept through without nightmares, the first time she cooked dinner without expecting a cruel remark, the first time she looked in the mirror and saw not a victim but a survivor. Robert's criminal proceedings moved forward in the background. Anna testified again, this time with more confidence, and when the sentence came time in prison for fraud and assault, she felt another weight lift. She did not celebrate his downfall with joy, but with a sense of justice, of closure. He no longer had power over her life. The house remained her anchor, a place she protected fiercely. She planted new flowers in the garden her mother had once tended their blooms, a sign of renewal. She framed her college acceptance letter to the state university and placed it beside her mother's photograph. Each milestone was a reminder that she was moving forward, not defined by the violence of the past, but strengthened by surviving it. The emotional undulation continued, but now it carried her upward. She allowed herself moments of sorrow for the years lost, for the innocence stripped away. But she also embraced joy, hope, and pride. She realized that fighting back had not only saved her inheritance, but had saved her spirit. The final act of reclaiming came one evening when she stood in the kitchen where Robert had once cornered her and replayed the moment in her mind. She saw his sneer, felt his grip on her wrist, heard his words. But then she looked around at the freshly painted walls, the polished counters, the warm glow of the lights, and realized none of it belonged to him anymore. It was hers. She whispered into the empty air, "You thought I was weak because I was not your blood. But blood is not what makes a family. Respect, love, and trust do." With those words, she closed her notebook, no longer needing to document pain, and began writing dreams instead. As weeks turned into months, the scars on her body faded, but the strength she had gained remained. She pursued her degree with a determination that surprised even her professors working long hours, but excelling nonetheless. She volunteered at a local shelter for women escaping domestic abuse, sharing her story when she was ready, offering hope to others who felt powerless. Each time she told them how she fought back, she saw recognition in their eyes, the flicker of belief that they too could reclaim their lives. By the one-year anniversary of the courtroom verdict, Anna hosted a small memorial for her mother. Friends, neighbors, and Rachel gathered in the garden. They lit candles, shared stories of Linda's kindness, and celebrated the legacy she had left. Anna spoke last, her voice steady as she told them about the promise she had kept. "My mother left me this house, but more than that, she left me the strength to protect it. She left me the courage to stand against someone who thought fear and fists could erase her love. Today, this house is not just walls. It is proof that respect and truth will always outlast cruelty." As the candles flickered in the twilight, Anna felt peace settle over her heart. She knew the journey ahead would still have challenges, but she had already faced the worst and survived. She had learned that love could live beyond blood, that justice could be won, and that her own voice was more powerful than Robert had ever allowed her to believe. And as she closed the evening with a quiet moment in her room, the photograph of Linda beside her bed, she whispered one last time, "We won, Mom. We really won." If this story touched you, if it made your heart race with anger, sorrow, and then relief as justice was finally served, then I want you to take a moment and imagine how many people out there are still trapped in silence right now. Anna's fight was not just about a house or a piece of paper. It was about reclaiming dignity, respect, and her mother's love from a man who believed cruelty and intimidation could erase everything. Stories like hers remind us that family is not always blood, that sometimes the people closest to us can be the ones who hurt us most, and that true strength comes when we decide not to accept abuse anymore. That is why I am building this channel to share stories of survival, betrayal, courage, and justice. Because every story carries a lesson, and every lesson might be the spark someone else needs to change their life. If you believe in this power of truth, if you believe that no one deserves to be silenced by fear or controlled by greed, then I am asking you to stand with me by supporting this channel. Hit that like button so YouTube knows stories like this matter. Subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. And most importantly, share this video with someone who might need to hear it today. Your comments are more than just words. They are proof that we are not alone, that there is a community ready to listen and respond. Tell me, what would you have done in Anna's place? Have you ever seen someone try to take advantage of another's kindness or use bloodlines as an excuse to abuse power? Drop your thoughts below. Share your location and the time you are watching. Let's prove that people all over the world care about justice and respect. Together, we can turn these stories into conversations and those conversations into change. So stay with me, keep watching, and let's make sure that no matter how dark the story starts, it always ends with strength, with dignity, and with hope.